That looks better. There we go.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Mary Linn, since I introduced you before, I'll save the second introduction. But again, thank you so much for helping to run this workshop.
Yeah, no worries. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or put your questions in the chat and I will moderate that for Mary Linn. But if you want to turn your camera on, great. If not, that's fine too. I am recording just for everyone that has joined. And Mary, I think we are ready. I think I see everyone, so should be good to go.
Great. Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks, Dr. Kula. I'm so glad to see everybody and hope your week is going well. And thanks especially to Elizabeth for coming out of vacation time to configure this session for all of us. I really appreciate it. You've all been interning now for a good long week or so. So I hope you're all settled in. We did go around the group last week. So I see some familiar faces. I see some names, and I hope everyone's having an interesting assignment in terms of the lab you're working in. We did talk last week briefly, just one point I'll clarify, which was about access to the licensed resources that you'll find linked on some of the material we'll be sharing. And the unfortunate fact is that setting up VPN from a remote location really is restricted to UC San Diego faculty, staff, and students. So if you're on campus, which I think many of you will be in one way or another when you're working in your lab settings, you will, of course, be able to access all of these freely. But when you're off campus, unless you have a UC San Diego assignment as faculty, staff, or a student, the VPN will not be available to you. So I apologize for that. I think there were people who were from other campuses, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's possible that you'd be able to access resources that might be available on your own campus that'd be similar. And a lot of what we're talking about and looking at are really for demonstration purposes only, since there isn't a specific assignment to do a paper. So in one way, I'm sad that we're not all in the exact identical same working environment and don't have access to the identical resources. And in another way, I just say, welcome to the real world. This is what it's going to be like as we go on to our different jobs and our different, either clinical or research facilities. We will have different resources. So I invite you to think flexibly and openly and creatively about the concepts and principles that we're talking about rather than the specifics of any given database, which is a long way of saying I'm really sorry. But that's the way it is. All right, we are going to revisit a set of slides that we looked at last week, but we're really going to hone in on the aspects of it that relate to conducting systematic reviews, which is a very particular form and process in terms of creating a review. So we're going to walk through those steps in particular, and then do a little bit of exploration of some of the resources that we run across in the process. I do not imagine this session is going to take 2 hours. So yay, you'll have some free time this afternoon, and you're welcome. And we will see where it goes. Please feel free to dive in with a question, raise your hand, or just unmute yourself and holler, and I will respond as well as I am able. So let me see if screen sharing is going to work here. I hope it does. Also, you should have gotten an email with a link to the resource guide that I've been sort of working from and talking about. And in that resource guide, down in the lower right-hand corner of the homepage, is a link to these slides that I'm going to be working from. So if anything crosses your mind or you have a question about it, you'll have access to the slides. Thanks, Lauren. The link is in the chat as well as having been sent to you. So let me see how the sharing. There we go. All right. Everyone should be able to see this slideshow. And it should look somewhat familiar because we did skip through a fair amount of it last week when we first met. And so I will move rapidly, if I can get there, through the learning objectives. And as I said, we are going, as we mentioned last week, there are multiple types of reviews. It's almost, you can make up a name and it will be a review type, but there are some that are specifically able to be filtered for in some of the databases that you'll be using. PubMed in particular allows you to filter for particular review types. So those are reviews that have a recognized format and structure that have been available in the academic or clinical world for enough time for them to have been sort of certified. But the terminology shifts and changes on some of these over time. So someone might say to you, they did a scoping review and you might go, what is that? And they might have a different idea about it. But what we're going to focus on today, because it's useful to know, is the structure and process of a systematic review. Systematic review is reproducible, which means there are components of the review that are in the published version of it that allows someone else to take your idea, run your search, and see if their results comply with yours. So the reproducibility is aspect, a key feature of a systematic review, along with some other features that we'll talk about. So we talked about narrative review, we talked about a scoping review, we talked about just the plain vanilla review article, and the process that an author will go through of collecting and defining a question, collecting evidence, producing results. And we talked about the types of evidence that you pull from when you're conducting your research or collecting information for your published review article. Any of these are going to be interesting to write, and you may end up writing them in your course of your career. If you conduct a randomized controlled trial, you'll have results, you'll have a reason why you conducted it, you'll have a question, you'll have evidence, you'll have results. If you can, have a very interesting individual case report, you may write that up and get it published. They show up at different points on this pyramid, but that doesn't mean that they are necessarily any more or less valuable in and of themselves. So learning more about them is useful. We're focusing on systematic reviews because it has a certain complexity, and it also has these a set of standards that have been developed over time by a series of organizations that we're going to talk about. So systematic review, just say it again, clearly formulated question, systematic explicit methods, and if you take it to the level of a meta-analysis, statistical techniques that pull out the data and do a statistical and very useful thing to learn. I'm not going to cover that in this section.
Sorry, Mary, we're losing you a little bit. Could you repeat the last thing you said about something that would be important, but you're not going to cover?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The statistical techniques that you would need to do the meta-analysis are very explicit and standard. It's just a set of techniques that many of you will be learning and perhaps already know and have in your back pocket, and that's terrific. It's just not something we're going to cover today or So you can learn more about it. It's great stuff, just not today. Now I am losing all kinds of things here. I just lost my VPN connection. All right. All right, I was talking about standards for systematic reviews. There are several organizations that are engaged in making sure that not just in the US, but globally, there are explicit stated standards for creating. I'm going to try to reconnect my VPN because I won't be able to get to any of these resources if, hold on one second. Hopefully this will work. There's my little thing. See, even if you're on VPN, it's not a walk in the park. All right. So as you can see on the slide, the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies has a set of published standards, and you can access those and read more about them. The ones that you'll find very useful are the PRISMA standards, the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analysis. If you ever wonder what PRISMA stands for, that's what it stands for. And the PRISMA standards are, I'm going to try to jump out here to those and see if I can share those instead. Let me just do that. So the PRISMA standards are published documents that include a checklist of the items that you should include in a published systematic review. They have people who work hard at maintaining them and updating them and helping authors improve the reporting systems. So the checklist and the flow diagram are things that you'll become. Let me just see if this will work. If I open this, will you be able to see it? I do not know. And I'm not sure that Prisma is a licensed resource, so it's possible that you'll be able to see it, even though, can you guys see that, or do I have to reshare?
We can see Prisma website.
Okay, but not the checklist.
No, not the checklist.
Okay, let me give that a try. I can tell this is going to be, all right, so the checklist, and as you can see, it gets updated fairly reasonably. It gives you a nice little document to identify exactly where the thing is reported, what, like what page in the document, and what section and what topic. So this is a really useful resource in terms of structuring your systematic review, making sure that you have all these elements, or if they're not included in the particular review that you're creating, that at least you're aware of them, and that if you do create them or include them, that you identify where they are located. So you can see it's pretty standard content for any kind of article that you'll be reading. It's, methods, sorry to do this, abstract, intro, methods, and the methods includes the search strategies. And as it states here, present the full search strategies for all the databases, registers, and websites, including filters and limits. I will tell you that most people just include the PubMed search or perhaps one and perhaps two searches, and then they say, and other databases. You do identify all your databases. You may or may not include all of the explicit search strategies. These are all useful to be aware of. Then you have your results, your discussion, and other information, etc. So that's the wonders of the Prisma checklist. And they also have a flow diagram, which you will find extremely useful because it helps you identify how many results from any particular search, how many articles were included, how many were excluded, and it walks you through this nifty flow chart. And that's available on that resource guide that has been sent out to you, and it's also available in this Prisma website. So I commend that to your attention. And I'm going to go back to the slideshow. All right. Are there any, so those are a couple of entities and agencies that, that develop standards and present and provide information about those standards. And now I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to the slideshow, or did I already do that? Are you seeing the slides, or are you seeing Prisma still? Prisma, I bet we're all tired of seeing.
No, sorry,
that.
we're on the slides. Yeah.
Okay, great. So those are sources that you will find useful just in organizing the work that you do. And since in a systematic review, you do a lot of it collaboratively, you have at least one or perhaps 2 or 3 other people involved in the project, because they're substantial and they take a fair amount of time. You want to have some shared documents that you collaborate with and that you maintain as a group. So it's useful to know where these things were located, and it's useful to pull them out, identify them, structure them, and share them with your work group before you get too far into the project. I mentioned before that we in the library are conducting, well, this is sort of the second year. We were a pilot last year, and so now we're kind of evolved into a more full-fledged systematic review support service. We do not have enough staff to sufficiently support the service, but we do have, we do provide search strategy consultations, and we provide documentation consultations. We provide information about the basis of systematic reviews, and we've had good success with some of the needs from the research community in the health system and on campus. So if you are working in a lab where someone is talking about doing a systematic review, or you get involved in some way, by all means, check out our pilot service, and we'll be glad to get involved if that would be useful to you. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, we will go on then. We talked about the formatted question that's typical in a systematic review last time, and the acronym being the PICO or PICO-T question. And we talked about it in some detail last time, so I'm going to skip through that, and I'm going to go to some of these 2 sources that we skipped over last time. The first one being this Prospero, the International Prospective Register of Systematic Reviews. And this is a site that you would go to if you were in, and this is a site, it's not licensed, you can get there just by typing in this URL. So it's a site that you would go to if you had developed a question and you wanted to be sure that you're sort of saying dibs on this one, we're going to work on this, and other research teams go figure out something else to do. And conversely, it gives you a spot to check and see if someone else is working on your question. And if someone else is already tackling it, you can kind of see if you could reconfigure the way you're approaching it, or you can just say, that's going to save me a lot of time. I'm not going to do it if they're already doing it. It's also a way of identifying collaborative teams, who else is working on it in the world. And if someone has registered, I'm going to actually show you because it's more useful to see it. And it's kind of a cool website. Again, this is listed in your sources. and it's open access. So it's from the UK, from York. It's maintained by York University. And if you want to register a protocol, you have to sign up and join it. If you just want to search it and see if someone else is doing your topic, you can. So here's how to register a review, but you can just search it here by entering words, or if you happen to know a number that a colleague or someone else has shared with you, you can type it in here. But if you wanted to do, you know, insulin pumps in children, or just, let's just go broad and see what's in here. And so we just did a very broad search because we're interested in doing something about insulin pumps. We find 19 records are already registered, and you can see the date that they were registered. You can see the status of the review. This is ongoing, ongoing. These were all registered in 2020. And what this will tell you about, in addition to just the date and the fact that it exists, is, well, let's just click on one here. If you click on it, it gives you the title of the review. It gives you a citation. You could use a citation if you've actually registered a review, you get a citation. And you can use that, say, in a grant proposal, or just as evidence of the work you've done so far. You get a citation. Here's your review question. And this should be a good example of a similar to a PICO-T question. Experience of patients in daily life, the population, parents of children with type 1 diabetes, the context, the outcome. In this case, they tell you the searches, and sometimes these are formatted in a more readable way, and sometimes they're just kind of straight text drop. So this tells you the databases they use: CINAHL, which is the Cumulative Index to Nursing and Allied Health Literature, Medline, which is PubMed. They've separated because they are sort of two separate databases. So it's interesting that they've listed them separately. Embase, which I mentioned last week, which is an international Elsevier product, kind of oriented toward literature. There's a lot of redundancy between PubMed and Embase, but they're not completely identical. And so we always recommend searching Embase. It's very useful. UC San Diego happens to subscribe to it, but it is one of those licensed resources. It is not available just out on the web. So that's one that you would have to be on VPN, or your institution would have to subscribe to it. PsycInfo, similarly a subscription-based one. The Cochrane Library, which we're going to talk a little more about today. The Scopus database is similar to the Web of Science database, which I described last week, and we can touch on again if you have questions about it. Scopus is produced by Elsevier. We at UC San Diego don't subscribe to it. It's quite expensive, and it's very similar to Web of Science. So we've always found them close enough in content and coverage that we've never felt that it was worth the price. But if you are at an institution that subscribes to Scopus, it's similar broad spectrum coverage of science-based resources. And it's identified all of these different databases, and then it just tells you a bunch of search terms. So in a funny way, that doesn't really help you know how to conduct those searches in those databases, but there you go. And they limited it to English language between 2012 and 2019. They talk about what types of studies they included, participants, interventions, context, outcomes, etc. And then in this case, they're talking about how they extracted the data. And so it gives you actually quite a remarkable amount of information. Some of these are so detailed, and it also gives you the person working on it. If this was something you really wanted to follow up on, you could now get in touch with the person who's doing this work or taking the lead on this work. And it gives you the start date. May to July is a pretty short turnaround, so we'll see. And since it's still ongoing, I assume that something came up and they didn't actually end up publishing. When you do publish, you close out your review and you put the citation to the publication. So that's Prospero, and I recommend it if you're interested in fooling around with any kind of research question. Take a look at it and see who's been doing that kind of work and where they've been doing it and what the approach has been. It can be sort of a nice inside look at how this approach is fruitful. This, I'm just trying to see if any of these are completed. Review completed and published. This last one, which was written, which was proposed in 2014, so good thing they finished it, was completed. So you can see, you can learn quite a lot. You don't have to register unless you're contributing or participating, although registration is free. And we've had at least 2 or 3 teams who have been working on systematic reviews who have registered. And it gives you a good background on this. So that one is worth taking a look at. It's very informative. And I'm going to stop sharing that now and go back to the slides. Hope you were all able to get on that and take a look. Let me see, where did my slides go? Here we go. Okay, so that was Prospero. It's worth taking a look at that. The Cochrane Library is a more complicated site that includes resources, clinical guidelines, review articles, systematic review articles. It also includes information about how to conduct a systematic review. So it's a good resource for learning the process and the protocols for conducting systematic reviews. And it's a good resource for finding guidelines. Cochrane has an international scope. They have work teams in the United States and across the globe. There's Cochrane US, which is you can get involved in that locally. Locally, I mean, in the US, they offer training, they offer, sort of engaging opportunities for doing work and doing research. So if you find that concept of evidence-based research to be interesting, then check out Cochrane or Cochrane US and see if that's something you want. They have like a focus on, respiratory diseases or cardiac diseases, and you work with the group that's focused on the disease entity or disease state that's of interest to you, and then you dig in with that group and work on their resources. So we subscribe to the Cochrane Library and have full access to those resources. So, and we also recommend them when someone is conducting a systematic review. We say, go to the Cochrane Library and see if someone's working on it, and also find out their advice and their guidance on conducting systematic reviews. They are really the gold standard in terms of those kinds of guidelines. So highly recommended that you review them, but I'm not going to drive you nuts by doing another screen share there. The reason that you would check Cochrane, again, is to see what kind of updates have been done in an area you might be interested in. And, you know, if it's been 4 or 5 years since a review was completed, it means that it's wide open. It's certainly worth reapproaching it and seeing if there's new evidence, new material, new resources that could be combined to give a fresh perspective on an old question. So again, another reason for checking Cochrane. All right, we've already talked about generating your search terms, and hopefully over the past week, perhaps some of you took a dive at PubMed and did some of this running basic searches. Again, I understand that this is not an explicit assignment for your work, so it might just have been a matter of curiosity, or you might have thought, oh, well, I could learn a little bit about this, and hopefully you were able to take a look at it. It's one of the ones that's wide open. Whether or not you have access to the VPN, so it's easy to get to. And we talked a little bit about the information that you'll see, including this PMID. The PubMed ID number is a number that you can use to search with, and that you can drop into that mesh analyzer tool and find the mesh terminology for articles that you're looking at. I was thinking I could actually show you an output from the mesh analyzer, because I was working with a gentleman who's got a question here, and I ran some of those searches, some of the PMID searches. I ran a PubMed search. I grabbed about 25 articles and I dropped them in to the analyzer, and this is what I can pull out from that. I pulled out let me just see if I can get to that, because it's kind of cool. It's just an Excel spreadsheet, but it does identify how the keywords are pulled out. Let me just see if I can do that. No, this one will be. Yeah, that's the one I want. I'm just pulling this out because it's a free tool, PubMed Analyzer. And if we can just take a quick look, you'll see how valuable that would be if you were looking for, here's some articles I've got. How do I find more articles? So let me just find my little share tab here, and we'll be in business. Sometimes did that work? I have the feeling that I got more than I bargained for there. Can you see a big old Excel spreadsheet?
I can't. I don't know about anyone else.
Well, bummer. All right, I'm going to give up on that because it's very frustrating. And if it's frustrating for me, it must be super frustrating for you. And we'll go back to the slides. It pulls out a very nice array of, oh, I see where I went wrong. Here we go. That should do it, right? Now you should be seeing a spreadsheet. Yes, no? Yes. So you put in the PMIDs across the top, and it spits back the title, the mesh headings, and the author assigned keywords. And this is helpful because Medline and PubMed don't always include those keywords, and yet they can expand the retrieval from your search. So you can comb through here, pull out these subject headings, and expand your search retrieval by using these terms that were available to you in the articles that were on the topic that you're interested in. It accommodates up to 20 PMIDs, and it turns around in a flash. So it's very efficient to use and captures a lot of information very quickly. Again, another tool that you'd want to share with your collaborators on a project. I'm going to get rid of these and go back to the slides. All right. So that was, I'm scrolling down here. Sorry to do that to you. That was another example of how to use your PubMed strategy to build your search. Using those PMIDs, for example, to drop into the mesh analyzer and documenting the whole time you're doing this in some kind of shared a Google Doc or some environment where you and your collaborators can see it together and build it together. So you're trying to collect mesh terms, keywords, synonyms, and you're using your Boolean logic to combine this or this and this concept and this concept. So your ands and your ors are important, and that logic can get very slippery. So it's nice to build either a Google Sheets or Excel spreadsheets or something that you're comfortable and confident in working with to keep it logically organized. You develop your search strategy, and as you saw in the Prospero registry, these are, and as you may see in an article, if you look at a systematic review, you'll see these are reported in a sometimes just a free form, like here's a bunch of terms. So it's nice to be able to have the Boolean logic in there so that you actually could reproduce that. This one you could actually cut and paste and drop it into PubMed and presumably rerun that search. And I can show you at one point in the PubMed itself, it will tell you what the search strategy was that was used to get that article back, and you can cut and paste that. So we looked at these last week, more about developing your search strategy. And then we talked about broadening out your search beyond the, predictable 2 databases and broadening it further so that you were pulling from more sources, and that is done in an effort to reduce bias. The concept of bias in literature searching or database searching is that any given entity, journal or journal aggregator, will over time demonstrate a certain similarity or bias, not intentional, but just you're always showing results from articles in New England Journal of Medicine. Eventually, you're going to end up with sort of the flavor of New England Journal of Medicine affecting, and the editorial decisions made by that journal affecting the kinds of results that you're seeing. So what you want to do for a systematic review is to really broaden your resources, your sources, and to think, well, yeah, I know what PubMed's going to show me, but what else can I look at? What are some other sources that are going to give me broader coverage, that are going to expand my the sources I'm drawing from, and that aren't going to be narrowed down? And I realize it's funny to use the term narrow because you're talking about databases that have thousands of journals and, millions of documents, millions of articles over time. And yet you can pull from 3 databases and get some unique material that you haven't seen in any one. And so you broaden your search, you reduce bias. That's the whole essence of that concept. And improve sensitivity, meaning you're pulling more broadly, so you're getting your search is more sensitive by searching multiple databases. And listed several here. Some of these will be important if you're working, say, on the implementation of electronic health systems or health information systems, or what are the kind of modeling and training that you need to do to set up the artificial intelligence that's behind the electronic health systems. If you're pulling out diagnostic predictions from the information you've got in your EHR, or what are some engineering sources, so computational engineering. If you're setting up a drug delivery nano object that's going to go down into your bloodstream and attack a tumor, what are you're going to want some engineering sources, or you know, for nano engineering, and those will show up in InSpec and Compendex. So you'll want to search broadly to find out about material can be tolerated by the human body. How do you make something so little it can go into your bloodstream, etc. Additional sources, the gray literature. The gray literature is not by old people, although it might be written by old people. It is literature that's not broadly, oh, I can see my connections going unstable here. It's not indexed in the standard indexes, and so you can't always reliably find it. For instance, conference proceedings. You go to a conference, you see a great poster or you hear a great presentation. How do you get that information? How do you get conference proceedings? There are some databases that are specially focused on publishing conference proceedings or indexing them or allowing you to get back to access that information. So the gray literature is material that's not indexed in the standard indexes that that you might think of. This was not in PubMed, it's not in Google. It's in, you know, it was some very specialized conference, and you want to figure out who published it, where did it get published, how do I find out about it, and you know, get to some crucial and useful information that way. Preprint servers I mentioned last week, and hopefully you got a nice view of them. They've become sort of all the rage, especially during COVID for some reason. They became a place where a lot of literature was published. They do not have the standard peer review process, and they're not managed or controlled by publishing entities, and so they're a little more open to material and publications. I know people on our campus, UC San Diego, who only publish in bioRxiv. They don't see the need to go through the whole complex and rigorous, not because it's rigorous, but just because it's time consuming, and time is wasted between the time you've gotten your research results and the time that you'd be able to share it publicly. If you put it into bioRxiv or medRxiv or archive, it's available. The sort of anecdotal, very brief overview version of how these kinds of archives came to be was archive was the initial. Conceptually, it was people in the field of physics and astronomy were very much into, let's share our results. We don't really care about the published literature in quite the same way. We just want to share our results. So a server in somebody's, you know, desk drawer became the heart and soul of archive. Archive is now, you know, there's membership, there's a little more control over it. It's not just in somebody's desk drawer anymore. UC San Diego's a member, as are the UCs, and it publishes broadly and is highly regarded in terms of a resource. So searching the archives, the preprint servers, even though they're not, in some circles, we would say they don't have quite the credibility that some of the other, more historic databases do. In other circles, they're they're more than fine. They're the cool place to publish. They're like, well, why would I publish anywhere else but bioRxiv? So I recommend those to your attention. Take a look, see who's publishing, search by UC San Diego, search by topic, search by, a researcher you might know, and see if they've got something in there. Clinical trial registries are also a place to search. Whoops, sorry. Just to see if someone's conducting a clinical trial. There's a fair amount of information about the research question that they're answering. And it's also useful for you if you're doing a systematic review to know that there's a clinical trial underway exploring insulin pumps, for example, and to be able to either contact those people and see what their research results, when their research results are going to be available, to see what their baseline information was involved in posing the question originally. Just to track those, and those are freely available. There's no licensing or VPN or anything about those. The World Health Organization has a registry that links to a bunch of different clinical trial registers. National Institutes of Health links to clinical registries as well. So worth checking out, definitely good source of information. Something you would certainly look at if you were doing a systematic review. Further down in this list of sources would be cited reference searching. So you have an article, you want to see what the references are in that article. And at this point, I assume your heads are sort of exploding because it's like, really, you would do all that work? And the answer is yes. If you're doing a full-on, full-fledged, serious, significant, systematic review, at the article, but the article's bibliography, and see how far back you want to go. You might have a time limit on your systematic review for some reason, but you would look at the references. So the cited reference searching, which I also pointed out was a feature in the Web of Science. Web of Science will help you do that kind of searching very quickly. Article bibliographies, hand searching. This is an artifact in the process that is listed pretty much as a standard in the in conducting a systematic review, and yet it's interesting to me to see that, because we at the Biomedical Library, for example, which is pictured right behind me, are reducing our on-site print collections as time goes forward, and as we're more able to get to electronic journals as our primary way of getting to a journal. So we have less and less in the way of an actual print journal. The thinking behind this was that the indexers are fallible, they miss things. There are articles that just don't get recorded or included. And so you would actually, journal title by journal title, you would pick, the top 20 in whatever field your question is pursuing, and you would go through by hand to make sure you had all the articles that were relevant. I'm not recommending it really. I'm just identifying it as something that was in the past considered part of this protocol. And then experts in the field is always valid, always useful. Ask the people in the lab that you're working with, ask some, a teacher, a postdoc, a fellow that you worked with a few years ago, someone else who has an interest in that area, someone you run into at a conference. anyone who's demonstrated an approach to the topic that is similar to what you're thinking of, or who is a known expert in that field, approach them, ask them what they're reading and what they're thinking about and what they're working on, and get information from those folks. Infinitely more valuable, in my humble opinion, to hand searching the print journals. All right, so selecting databases. This is not a simple thing, not a snap of the fingers. It can take a couple of weeks to narrow down, or longer, to poke around, narrow down which databases you're going to work on. And then once you've done that, conducting the developing a search strategy within each database, because each of them will have a different interface and a different search set of search features that are available to you. We looked at these last week. We looked at NCBI. We looked at how on this campus, the UC San Diego campus, the link to the databases is on the library homepage. I did mention to you that, well, a couple of things. We determined that not all of you have access to these databases necessarily, but hopefully over the course of the summer, you may be able to take a peek at them. But I also mentioned that we're in the process of transitioning from this interface to a different library management system. So if you come back and look at this at the end of July, it will be a very different looking page. Hopefully still intuitive. You're all very smart people. It should be as easy to use as any given library web page is to navigate. We're hoping to design it for the optimal user experience. And I'll be back when Reed teaches you about the R, using R as a tool to extract data and manage data. I think we're teaching at the end of July, and by then should be able to offer you a peek at the new interface. That'll be fun. So don't get fixated on this one. I assume you all have very flexible capacity for a change, I hope. We talked about some of these databases. Embase, I mentioned earlier today, is one that is managed and produced by Elsevier and is a subscription-based one. It does have a structured vocabulary. It does utilize and acknowledge and recognize mesh terms, but it also has its own structured vocabulary called mtree. And you can sign up, you can save your searches, you can export your search results. You can, if you register, registering is free. I encourage you to register any of these databases that you explore and think you're going to be using long-term, because you can save searches. You can send yourself, you can set up a search alert so that if something new is published on the topic that you've identified as of interest to you, you will get an alert. It might not come up every week, but it might come every couple of months. There might be, oh, there's a new article about insulin pumps, and they'll send you that information. Same in Web of Science. You can see at the top of the page there, searches and alerts. You can set up an alert in almost all of these databases, and it will keep you current with topics that become of interest to you as you develop your careers as scholars and researchers. So something to watch out for in a database. Make them do the work for you. Make them send you the new information. You don't have to go back and rerun your search every couple of weeks. All right, we are going to, let's see, talk about these databases. I mentioned that Web of Science is its sort of claim to fame, and its real utility and value is that it does do citation analysis. tells you how many times this article has been cited as something. This one was only published in June of 2020, so 2 is not a bad number. And it tells you how many cited references are included in the article, and you can get additional information as you click through on any of those aspects that are reported there. It gives you some nice visuals. So if you get interested in doing citation searching, happy to set up a quick consult. It's tons of fun to work in Web of Science. It's a really neat database. It is currently owned by, let me go back here, a company called Clarivate Analytics, which is its latest owner. And prior to that, I was owned by Thomson Reuters, the sort of news outlet folks. All right. I think that we are going to actually talk a little bit more about this process, and probably in about 10-15 minutes we will wrap up for the day, unless you have questions or want to hang around and do some kind of quick online consult. So this is information about gathering your results. I mentioned to you that you're going to want to have a shared space where you collect the search results. When you run a search and you get 50 or 200 or 20 results, you're going to want to park it somewhere, because you're searching, say you're searching 4 databases. You're going to want to collect from each database. So these are tools that are available to you. Mendeley used to be open source and free. It's now owned by Elsevier, and I believe it's still, there's still a free version, but your antenna always sort of go up when anything is purchased by one of those large entities like Elsevier, because you assume that eventually there will be a price tag for premium ownership or something like that. So Mendeley is a good place to capture citations. Zotero is still open source and still free to use, and is very functional and effective. EndNote is an old classic, an old favorite, and used to be Thomson Reuters, and is now Clarivate Analytics, which you'll remember are the people who own the Web of Science database. So EndNote, we have a web-based version of EndNote that you can access on campus, and you can set up a shared collection of resources, so you can share it with any number of people and work on that together. These tools allow you to deduplicate, or dedupe, as we say, because you'll want to, if you dump in a bunch of results from Embase and a bunch of results from PsycInfo and another bunch of results from CINAHL, you want to track how many from each database, but then ultimately you want to get rid of the duplicates and just end up with a unique set of articles that are valuable to you. So that deduplication function is useful. Another place where you can gather results that is not as broad scale is in the PubMed site. You can register for an NCBI identity, which will be useful to you as a researcher going forward, because for any kind of grant proposal to NIH, you want to have an NCBI identity. But you can register there and save your PubMed results. That's only your PubMed results. And so then you have to toss them into the bundle with any other results you get. And that's where these bigger, these more universally applied citation management tools come into play. So get familiar with one, pick your favorite. Be sure to register for an NCBI account, but don't limit yourself to that. Then you identify the studies for, now we're going back to talking about the systematic review process. You identify the studies for inclusion, you apply your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So for instance, say you wanted to just talk about this particular, let's go back to insulin pumps. Say you just wanted to talk about it in children. So your exclusion would be adult populations. And you would identify that going prior to running the search and evaluating the results, because you don't want to be led by the results. You want to apply your question in this way. You have at least 2 independent reviewers to go through and to say, yes, it fits, no, it doesn't fit. You have a third reviewer for a tiebreaker. I list here a few tools that are helpful for listing these, for doing this step in the process. The library doesn't subscribe to them, and I'm not going to go into the details on them. Distiller and Covidence cost money, and some labs do subscribe to them. We in the library currently don't, but we are happy to give advice on using them. So you document all your decisions about what you include, what you exclude, and your reasons. And I'll show you why you do that in a minute, and how you do that, rather. It's on a Prisma flowchart form that I mentioned previously. You pull out data if data is in a form that it can be pulled out for qualitative or quantitative analysis. Analyze and synthesize your results and interpret them, commenting on these particular aspects, the strength of the evidence, the applicability of the results to your question, any kind of limitations, and then implications for future research. Those are standard questions that you would put in any kind of review article, but in a systematic review, you would include, if you had done some kind of analysis, the standard for a systematic review is usually a forest plot. That's what, if you'll see the logo for Cochrane, that's a forest plot. And that's why they use it as their logo, because that's a standard way of presenting the evidence that you extract. I've included a link here that you'll be able to see in the slides, and it's also in the resource guide that the link was sent out to you. This forest plot generator, that's really fun to use, and just to get the idea of how to do that. But that's a tool that is available to you, and take a look at it, see what you think. This is a standard way of presenting information in from systematic reviews. Forest plots, yay. We already looked at this checklist, preferred reporting items for systematic reviews. And I mentioned how helpful it was in terms of staying organized and reminding you of things you might have forgotten to double check or identify. So you document to ensure scientific integrity, to ensure reproducibility. It's standard in any research project, but for a systematic review, it's kind of the raison d'etre. It's the reason you're doing a systematic review, is so that you can reproduce it and someone else can follow your methodology and go, yep, good. Or run it themselves. It also, because it's a fairly time-consuming and in-depth process, documenting helps you to remember what the heck you did. So you document every step in the process. And this is the flow chart that I mentioned. Again, there's a link to this as an empty form that you can use. There's a link to it in the materials that I've sent to you. So you identify the numbers of records, the numbers of records, the numbers of records after you dedupe, the numbers you screened, the numbers you excluded, the numbers that were actually eligible because they were full quality, because you do review for quality, the number excluded with a reason, number of studies included in a qualitative synthesis, and the number of studies, if you do a quantitative synthesis, the number of studies included in that. So those are the phases. the identification of articles, the screening of articles, the review for eligibility, and then what was actually included in the grand finale. So that's the flow of information. And the Prisma flow diagram will help you to do that and keep track of that. So it's a tool that's useful to know about. And with that, I am going to close out my conversation and ask again if there's any questions, and then remind you that all of these materials and resources are available in the resource guide that was shared and in the slides, which are embedded in the resource guide. So before you go and do a dance of joy at having a free hour, let me know if you've got any questions, or if you want me to hang around and show you something specific. I'm happy to do that because I've blocked out 2 hours on my calendar.
Hi, Mary. I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe I missed this when you were talking about it, but is having a UCSD email enough to access the database and sources, or would you actually need a student account?
You should be able to activate the VPN if you have a UC San Diego email address.
Okay, awesome.
Faculty,
Thank you.
staff, or student. And if there's any problem with that, you contact academic computing. That on the library homepage, there's a how to set up. Let me see if I can get to that for you. How to set up your VPN. And because the library doesn't actually manage the VPN, we it and we make it a requirement, but it's managed by academic computing, and they are ready and waiting to help you with any questions you might have. So I'm going to get to that that page. Let me just show you where it is. And so that's the library homepage, right? And or the current version of the library homepage. As I mentioned, it's going to change, but the functionality of it, the information behind it, are going to still be there. So can you still see that? So you go to the Computing and Technology tab, and you go to Connect from Off Campus, and it has the information you need about the virtual private network. Okay.
Thank you so much.
And then at the bottom, it has the, we try to shovel you over to the campus IT for any questions that you might have if it doesn't work out for you. So fingers crossed, hope it works. Thanks for the question. Anybody else? Well, as I said, I'm glad to see you all again. Glad you're making your way through this really interesting opportunity and making good use of your summer. I hope the labs and the projects you're working on are fascinating to you. And I look forward to seeing you again briefly in the session where Reed is going to teach you everything you ever wanted to know about R. And he's going to be run a good session. So I will be seeing you again. And if you have any questions, if you have any kind of sort of library strategy questions, in the meantime, don't hesitate to contact me. My email is on that guide that got sent out to you, and I'm really happy to be available.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm going to stop the recording.